Testing. Is it on? Yeah, it's on. Hello and welcome to today's episode of Stand Up. It's the final episode of the week and I'm on the road, so a quick opening to my guest. He is one of the best, one of my favorites. It's the Great Sam Seder joining me today. We had an awesome conversation, and I think you're really going to like it. If you're not already a fan of his show, The Majority Report, I cannot recommend it higher. He has a great team and a great co-host in Emma Vigland and an awesome perspective on so many things. He, of course, is a longtime show host. He was at Air America. He's been a comedy writer. He's done stand-up. He has done it all. Majority.fm to learn more. At Sam Seder on Twitter, although he's not using it as much anymore because it's become so anti-Semitic. Anyway, we had an awesome conversation. I hope that you love it. And go let him know because he's always so good to join me. He's got a massive following. He doesn't need to do it, but he does. We've been friends for a long time. Sam Seder, ladies and gentlemen, let's do it. Oh, yeah, there he is. Sam Seder joins me now. Thank you so much. You don't have to do this. You do it as a kind favor. I love talking to you. I appreciate you. Thank you for joining me.
It is always a pleasure, Pete.
I know that you have a lot going on, and I have several questions. I've written some questions. I have a pad.
Really?
Yeah, right. Well, a couple, subjects I want to discuss with you. Number one, big controversy right now about how to pronounce Ron DeSantis' last name. And I actually think this matters because both the campaign and his super PAC are kind of not answering. He himself has said it two ways. And I actually think to some extent, it's a reflection, or more importantly than anything else, it's kind of a distraction that Axios and others are asking him to answer. What do you think of him and his campaign launch?
I mean, his launch, I think, has been, I just can't imagine somebody was like, this is how we want it to go. I'm of two minds of this. I used to listen to Rush Limbaugh quite a bit, sure, even before I got into radio. And I don't know if you ever listened to him, but he would strategically mispronounce a lot of words. He would call school. And I mean, just like stupid things like that. But I 20 years later, I still remember that. And when I was doing AM talk radio, I said, like, I'm going to adopt that for some things and strategically mispronounce some things. So I would call at one point, you remember Bill Frist?
Sure. Yeah.
And
Doctor, Senator.
Yeah.
Tennessee,
but
maybe?
There was that, was it the Shivo case down in Florida?
Yep.
Was that what it was?
Yep.
And where I can't remember. I think it was a woman was in a coma or in a vegetative state, and her husband wanted to take her off life support because that's what the woman had stated to him that he wanted to do. And Bill Frist would, had diagnosed her from the Senate.
Right.
And
he's a doctor.
But he was a doctor. But still, even though doctors really shouldn't diagnose someone who's in a vegetative state from, 1,000 miles away. And so I started calling him Bill Frist. Without really, the implication being he's a little Christ-like, but the audience didn't know that. And I had a friend who worked, or a friend of my sisters or something, had worked for Amy Goodman. And she had basically told my sister that Amy Goodman came in one day and was like, why does Sam Seder pronounce Bill Frist as Bill Frist? Is that his name? And I realized why Limbaugh did this is because it made you think about it. And I'm not convinced that that's not what DeSantis is doing.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, he may not be, or he may be. But did you read that story about where he would go on dates with women and he would say, like, well, let's get some Thai food. And if the woman corrected him, he would not date her.
I did not hear that, but I feel weird because I actually had the exact same litmus test when I was single.
You would mispronounce. That's right.
But not Thai food. It would just be generally Chinese. And if I would say Chinese. And if they corrected me, I was just out.
That's it. We're done. I'm not going to get involved.
I think that's super normal.
But it's not. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine that Ron DeSantis doesn't know how to pronounce his last name. I mean, it's possible he's doing this on purpose, or maybe he just like different times he hits it a different way. But there's a reason why they're not answering it, and it's really because I think like at this stage of the game, they just want people to talk about them. I mean, I think that's his theory. Why else would you do the Twitter thing? You're not going to reach as many people. Mm-hmm. There's no, I mean, I still remember, Trump going down the escalator. I mean, Trump is a performer. He understands what's going to create an image. What's the image of DeSantis on Twitter? I don't even think there was one. It was just sort of like, sorry, we're having technical problems is really, and so I think, I don't know. That's my guess. Otherwise, I also think he's psycho. So I think that's part of it.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, I think there's a pretty credible account of him cheering on torture at Guantanamo. Right. Mike Preisner at Empire Files had interviewed a former prisoner in Guantanamo. I think this was back in December. And subsequent to that, the story's been picked up more and more. And he was a JAG, and he was in Guantanamo. And this guy remembered him. And he remembered him as being basically a cheerleader for the torture that was going on there. So in my book, that rates you a lunatic.
Mansour Adaifi, now who's pronouncing it? A Yemeni.
He's coming out and starting to talk now too. So yeah. I think that's going to be a bigger story. But with this recent revelation of this audio with Trump, DeSantis may be feeling it's like all I need to do is just get name recognition, have people know that. I mean, that's in my estimation, that's his only way to win would be if Trump is incapacitated in one way or another, either by health or by prison.
Thought experiment just for a moment, because I don't think it happens. But DeSantis is the nominee. How does he possibly win in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, whatever states you want to add or subtract, given that he is as extreme as any governor, arguably, in the state? He's got a terrible, terrible record. It works for Florida, but if he's a nominee, how does he win is there any pathway for him to 270 electoral votes?
I mean, the last couple of elections have been decided by, anywhere from like 40 to 70,000 votes over the course of like 3 or 4 states. I don't think there's a scenario where any given candidate doesn't have a chance to win. I think there's just too many X factors. My inclination is to believe that DeSantis is not a terribly good candidate, but I think people underestimate the sort of just like reflexive pull lever for the Republican. Right. My sense is that Biden is not assuming that his health is maintained. Biden is not enough of a reason for massive turnout on the Republican side. But that's this is really just about which candidate motivates the other, right, the opposing party. But, you look at like the off-year elections and people are coming out to vote. And I I don't think DeSantis is terribly inspiring, but I'm not sure that people are aware of his radical record in the way that you and I are. I think in some ways DeSantis scares me more as a president than Trump would at this point, because I just Trump I don't think has an ideology. Right. I mean, I think he's a bigoted guy, and I think he's a horrible human being, and but he operates almost exclusively in what will put a dollar in his pocket or will benefit him. And the calculation of what he needs to do to benefit him, particularly in a second term, is not the same as to what it would benefit. Well, I mean, particularly in a second term, right, is not as scary to me as DeSantis, who I believe, like I say, I think he's an ideologue. I think he's a true believer. I think he's a psycho, and would have, if he was to make it to the presidency with his record, he would be highly motivated to do horrible things.
I want to ask you about media stuff. I love on your show when you're critical of any network, outlet, or individual. Some of my favorite stuff. I feel also, though, that you don't do a lot of, and I may be missing it, talking about Trump's hypothetical legal situations and cases. And that's why I want to ask you about the media, because I do probably more than a lot of people. I don't know what category I'm in, but certainly like MSNBC, like that whole 2-hour block with Nicole Wallace is all these legal experts almost all the time. Yeah. There's certainly a tremendous amount to talk about, but what do you think about when they do it? Why don't you do it as much? Because I want your take on what you think his legal issues are, especially with this latest news that CNN got the scoop on, the great CNN.
I mean, I have always, for the most part, I have interest in legal things, but not like when things get into like a trial and an investigation.
Yeah, you were this way on Russia too, on the Trump Russia.
Yeah, I think I had like Marcy Wheeler on, maybe 3 or 4 times over the course of 2 years, just to get a sense of like, where's the investigation going and this and that, because, it's the president of the United States. Really, the issue with Trump is sort of binary, it seems to me, which is, will he be prevented from running or not? Right? Like that's it. And
well, some people would say we want justice too. That's another thing.
I agree, but I mean that process to me, I'm not this. This is not a critique of other people covering it. It's just why it doesn't interest me is like I have always, in almost all legal cases, the Zimmerman case, the Rittenhouse, OJ, whatever it is. I mean, even OJ, like I never watched the day of that trial.
Wow.
And I just, for me, it's like the question is like the political questions end for me usually, is this person going to be charged? And then it becomes like the judicial process and it just becomes the understanding that you can have from that is not really actionable. In other words, like, I'm not going to ever be able to charge anybody. I'm not ever going to be able to. It's interesting on some level, or I can understand why people find it interesting. But like, I'm never going to be able to use, the knowledge of like, well, there are 3 elements to a manslaughter case, right. Or whereas. So for me, I'm more interested in things that are actionable. So like, if I explain to people like what's in the debt ceiling and why it's problematic, people have a better understanding of, how SNAP works or, a budget process so they can assess, when this is happening so they can understand their government. I just don't find it as interesting when it gets to legal proceedings. I just want to know the binary question, like, is this going to prevent him from running or not? And it might, but and particularly like throughout all that, all these investigative things, nobody really knows until it happens.
Right. I do feel like you're putting an extra A in the word binary. That's what I feel. I feel like you're saying binary.
Well, like I say, it makes you pay attention, and you're thinking
doing that
about
for
it.
ratings.
Yeah, and I'm doing it for just engagement. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I honestly, like 70% of my show is people IMing in and explaining to me how I've mispronounced things.
I've noticed it. And
modernity is a big one for me, although now it's been hammered into me so much. Etc. I'm not even sure if I'm saying it correctly. Abstentia, I have a problem with. There's many. I don't say Paschetti. So,
I love how you talk about the budget process. You've been doing great work talking about the debt ceiling negotiations. I don't know how I listen to you and I'm like, how does he know so much about like the budget process and appropriations and stuff? He never worked as a staffer or anything. But so I really like that you're doing that. I know that you understand it and I trust you when you're talking about it. So I want to ask you about this debt ceiling deal. You have a bit different point of view than I think a lot of people that I've certainly been talking about it. So overall, I guess it's, so we're talking on what day is it? Thursday morning. So it's passed the House. It's going to the Senate real quick. It will be passed out of the Senate. I know Mike Lee and there's a couple other Republicans, but it's going to get out of that, right? And Bernie Sanders.
It's hard for me to imagine that,
Right. Okay.
I mean, Mike Lee's going to make a stink and he may slow it down, a day. Well, what I found shocking was that Rand Paul was like, oh, I'll just let it go. Like, I was really sort of surprised by that.
Yeah. Where's he been?
Well, I don't know. I just read today that he said he's not going to like slow it down, which is, I'm not sure what that's about, but because that's usually like his entire function is when he's not self-accrediting himself as an optometrist or whatever it is he does. What is the perception? Are a lot of people telling you like it's a good deal? It's not that big of a deal.
I'm very much a Rothkopf disciple these days. I talk to him a lot. I did talk to Bruce Bartlett. Who else have I talked to? I've been reading everybody. And a lot of people are just talking about not necessarily, that Biden should get a lot of credit for holding his fire on a lot of things and that this deal is really good and Kevin McCarthy looks kind of dumb. But that this is, I think the best point is this is the deal you would have gotten if things were, quote, normal in a budget process, and yet they held it over on the debt ceiling. So it's not, as long as Republicans have the House, this is the best you could possibly do. I don't think that's your point of view.
No, I mean, I understand that. I understand that argument. I mean, I understand that argument, but I think it discounts like two things. Okay. One, it discounts the idea that the debt ceiling had created no leverage for the Republicans. Like everybody's saying, like, if there was no debt ceiling and you went into a budget process, like this is what you would get. But I find it hard to believe that the debt ceiling didn't in any way create any leverage for the Republicans. Like maybe it didn't. Maybe it was all just totally a charade. But I have to believe that the debt ceiling created some leverage. And in that instance, the leverage that it's creating advantages, to the extent that it advantages anybody, it advantages the Republicans in that scenario. Now, maybe it's all just a farce. But I don't think so. I mean, certainly, let's put it this way. Like, there's a reason why Manchin and others, I've heard that there was, maybe 10 others, Democratic senators who did not want to get rid of the debt ceiling as a thing in December of, when they had the opportunity to do it through reconciliation. There's a reason for that. They use it as a cover as a way of cutting things. And for Manchin, it was a way of getting his pipeline in there. And they use it like, it exists in nature, and it's a force that we have to reckon with, but it's not. And I think it's used in that fashion, both by Republicans and by Democrats on some level. And that's why they don't want to get rid of it, because it gives them some measure of cover, and it had to provide the Republicans with some leverage. So let's say instead of going down this course, Biden, 2 months ago said, I didn't even say anything. I mean, other than when somebody asks, what are you doing about the debt ceiling? Oh, Janet Yellen tells me there is no issue with the debt ceiling because I got a ruling from the OLC that I am constitutionally obligated to instruct her to pay the debt of the United States because the 14th Amendment makes it very clear I don't have an option. And they could have resolved that with this case in Boston. That there's a case in Boston. Are you aware of this one?
No.
Oh, there was a case, and I don't know what the disposition of it is now. I assume after this it's going to be moot. But a federal employee union brought a case in Boston, essentially saying it happens to be in Boston, federal court in Boston. The president is, or I don't know who they brought it against, but the case is you can't not pay the debt. Maybe I think it's against Yellen, because what she's doing with the way that they sort of do the special tricks to avoid going through the debt ceiling is by freezing contributions into a federal pension. And so they put those contributions in, they keep the cash on hand, but that decreases the value of those pensions. And so they were basically suing, saying you can't do that because you have a constitutional obligation to pay these debts, and you're inhibiting the growth of our pensions. And Biden and the DOJ had the opportunity to join that suit on the side. They didn't have to contest it, or they could have even joined it on the side of the plaintiffs if they wanted, to get a ruling in federal court as to what their constitutional obligations are. Huh. And that would have expedited the whole thing. At one point he was saying it would take too long and this and that. And from my perspective, there's a political element to this, right? It's possible the Supreme Court could say this debt is no good. You can't do this. That the Constitution, despite what the Constitution says, there's a statute that says you have to. I mean, I wouldn't put anything past them. But then there can be instead of, and I listen to the AP radio every morning to get a sense of how things are reported. You can start to say look, this is a Republican problem. This is a Supreme Court problem. I mean, there's a lot of political value that's important, maybe not today, but in the future. And, there's a reason why Kevin McCarthy went to Wall Street to announce, whatever it was 2 months ago, their budget was basically as a way of saying, at the end of the day, guys, don't worry, But he knows who his constituency is. There would have been too much pressure on them and the Supreme Court, in my estimation. And so let's assume that there's no debt ceiling and it just becomes the budget. Then the Democrats can make it about they want to. And I know the argument is that with SNAP, you're raising it from 50 to 54 or, the work requirement.
Yeah.
You're going to lose a lot of people who are actually eligible for SNAP, who do have jobs, but just haven't responded because they don't know that they need to respond.
It's a really important point. You mentioned that on your show. I'm glad you mentioned it. Yeah.
And on the other side, they're getting rid of work requirements for veterans and for homeless people and for people, who are unhoused. I would imagine that a lot of veterans will have, there's more opportunity theoretically, maybe, for veterans to be aware of this, that some of them who don't have jobs are now eligible for food stamps because maybe they're in touch with the VA and the VA, maybe there are people, but, the number of agencies and, communication with unhoused people is very, difficult. And so, and remember, this is not also, veterans are a static group, right? Once you're a veteran, you're always a veteran. Much easier to be identified. Unhoused people, it's a churn for a significant amount.
Great point.
And they won't know they're eligible for those food stamps. And so, people are saying, well, it's going to be a wash in terms of actual numbers of people. I mean, I think I probably said this last time I was on, but we eliminated 40% of child poverty in a year. We eliminated, in a year. And then we decided, not that important. And within a year, those same numbers of child poverty are going to be back to what they were before.
And you mean because of the tax credit that passed, that it eliminated a huge 40%, and then it expired and wasn't renewed.
Exactly.
But whose fault is that?
Well, American societies. This is my point. Is there's so much that happens in our politics to shroud this stuff. Nobody's talking about that. And I don't know, I'm sure there's a couple of things that are more important and more relevant, but what could be this is supposed to be the sort of low hanging fruit. Everybody cares about the children. You eliminate child poverty by 40% in 1 year like this, right? No grand war on poverty. Just we sent, $300 checks per kid per month to, a significant portion of Americans. I can't remember what the exact percentage is. I think cut off at 160,000 a year. And we just let it expire as a society. No real media outcry, no real political outcry, and that's because so much of this is shrouded. And that's the problem I have with the debt ceiling. I can understand from a wonk's perspective, but there's an acceptance that this is the process. And it quite clearly didn't have to be.
Right.
And there is an incentive for our politicians not to politicize.
And our media.
To not politicize and show the real political and human aspects of this.
Right.
And so that's on those grounds I'm critical.
Why for child poverty could be solved if you would just allow these children to go to work, which is what it seems like a lot of Republican-led states are doing, getting rid of these child labor laws, and
that's all about child trafficking. That is all about immigrant labor. Period. End of story. That is not they are not doing it so that,
That's to allow, I'm sorry, just so I understand you, they're making these new laws to allow immigrant
what they're doing
teenagers.
Is they're dropping the requirements to establish the age of these kids, and you don't have to have parental signatures anymore. Right. So
no more parental rights. Lots of parental rights, and then no parental rights also.
Right. But here's the point. If a 15-year-old, if you as an employer don't need to check your 14-year-old or 15-year-old or 16-year-old workers' parental signature,
right,
you are off the hook in terms of having to report the fact that this person's actually a parent probably in El Salvador or in Guatemala or in Honduras or in Mexico. That's what's going on. If you look at the people who vote for these things, I guarantee you, the people who this is the game that we play on the show. As soon as we hear some state senator has brought up this bill, you look and see what the number one employer and number two employer is in that district, and it is a chicken processing plant. It is a slaughterhouse. It is like all these places where you hear all these stories of 50, 60, 100 immigrant kids who have been working there, and they're 15 years old and they're 14 years old. That's what this is all about.
Interesting. I had no idea that was the angle.
That's what it's all about.
Thank you for clearing
that up. And
that's
all child trafficking.
How is it child trafficking?
That's what it is. When you take, these children are coming in. They're being a lot of times they're taking out of they're being released into custody by a CPB to people who are ostensibly like their relatives or their friends or this and that, and they end up getting trafficked to work in these horrible, slaughterhouses or processing plants or stuff like that.
I'm not hearing your opinion. Where are you on child trafficking, Sam?
I mean, look, nothing. I mean, yeah, that's.
Okay. Just a final question to get you wound up. I'm just going to say 2 words and then no question. You can just say whatever you want. I've been hearing you. It seems like you're not really on Twitter so much unless it's to tweet about these 2 words. One of the words is Diane and the other is Feinstein.
Yeah. Well, it's true. I'm on Twitter less and less these days. I mean, this is the joke I've been saying is like, I used to go for the news, to get my news from Twitter. And now the biggest story that I see in my feed is that I'm a Jew.
Oh, yeah.
That seems to be the big lot. That seems to be the big news. Like every reply I get.
Because things have changed. Because not only are they allowing hate speech, but it would seem some people are saying there's some good reporting that they're highlighting it. They're promoting those accounts that.
Well, $8 and gets them a blue check or whatever it is, and I mean, but the Dianne Feinstein thing is. It is stunning to me. I mean, there was another piece in the Times the other day. I mean, in the past couple of days, like just talking about how this is a Weekend at Bernie's thing, and I have a lot of sympathy for this situation. My mom has Alzheimer's.
I'm sorry.
And is actually a little bit younger than Feinstein, maybe a lot younger, 4 or 5 years. And at that age, and it is unconscionable to me what is going on with her. But even if it is what she ostensibly wants, I would be willing to wager everything you and I both own that if I gave Dianne Feinstein a will that said your millions go to Sam Seder and she signed it, that document would not last in court for a second, right? Like there's no way she could sign a document right now that couldn't be challenged as like she was not competent to sign that document.
Right.
I mean, it's just not possible. I'm quite sure someone must have power of attorney for her. And yet she is representing millions of people. In addition to, now she's starting to miss a couple of votes. She's probably going for the most important votes. I have heard 2 different stories as to whether they could replace her if she resigns. And I've heard 2 different stories, and I really don't know if the Republicans could prevent a replacement. However, I do know that in the event that they did prevent a replacement under parliamentary procedure, the president of the Senate has the ability to overrule the parliamentarian. And so it's doable. It's doable. There's just no doubt about it. and they don't want to do it. And I don't know who the they is in this instance. There was a story. It's getting reported a lot that Pelosi's daughter is Dianne Feinstein's number one caretaker, and not just like political caretaker. Seems to be like a personal caretaker,
right?
And that Pelosi, and all of what I'm stating is factual, not speculative. Pelosi has already come out and said, "I want Schiff to be the senator from California." Gavin Newsom has committed to appointing, in the event that Dianne Feinstein was to leave, appointing a black woman as the interim senator. He could appoint any black woman. He could appoint anybody who agreed to be a caretaker. But there's a lot of pressure on him if that black woman was to be appointed to be Barbara Lee, both because I think primarily because Newsom is trying to position himself in a left lane of the party. And I'm not sure if that's for
future presidential
ambitions, but that's clearly what he's doing. His people are like, I can tell because I start getting solicitations. When I start getting solicitations from politicians, like you can tell that, and I never, I don't have the time. I'm not interested. Like, I don't need to talk to anybody in their
solicitations to come on the show.
Yeah, or just like vague overtures like that, like, hey, hey, Sam, I'm from Gavin Newsom's office. We're just sending out material. I just want to keep you informed as to what we're doing in California. Right. I'm like, all right. I don't. I just, and it's not like, I don't know that it's like me personally. It's like I'm on some list. Yeah, and so there's a lot of pressure on him, I think, to appoint Barbara Lee,
who's also announced that she's running for Senate. Katie Porter, Barbara Lee, and Adam Schiff, I think, are the three.
Yes. Prominent. And so there's a theory out there that Pelosi's people, and maybe there's also, the Senate people. There's other people who think that if Barbara Lee gets the interim Senate position, that it'll give her an advantage in the 2024 election for that seat, which will be open. And so they don't want to do that. But maybe there are other reasons, but none of them seem sufficient to me. If you could guarantee me that we're going to get her in there for every judicial nomination vote, and it'll be easy, and she will not screw up, right? I have firsthand experience with this disease. It doesn't get better. It only either maintains or it gets worse. And usually when it gets worse, it's like it's a slow decline, and then it's a sharp decline, and then it hits another plateau. And, to the extent where it's like, you want to vote yes on this. And from the time from when someone whispers that to no, that can happen.
It's dangerous.
And then what do?
Yeah.
Do you say oh, wait a second, she meant yes? Just like every time they do this with I understand you're not running for re-election. That's not true.
She's answered that way.
Oh yeah. When her office put out that she was not running for re-election, reporter said, "So you're not right." That's not true. And then her aides had to come over and be like, "No, it is true. Do you remember? It's true." Okay, it's not going to get better. And not only are we 14, 16 months away from the election, but then you've got November, December, you've got in January. So, we're talking about 17, 18 months. I'm sorry. It's just not going to work.
Right.
Or it's not a legitimate risk. But it's just going to keep going on like this until the next real screw up.
I appreciate that and everything else. I'll let you go. I don't want to. I want to stay here with you for a long, long time. But
always a pleasure. You know exactly which buttons to push to get me riled up.
Well, I listen to you. I respect you. Big fan. And I know you're about to be arrested, so I'll let you go.
Thank you. Pete, always
well,
pleasure.
there you have it. What did I tell you? Isn't he great? Sam Seder. Go follow him. Please let him know that you heard him here on the show. Please subscribe to the show because I can't do it without you. It's free, but it ain't cheap. So sign up now at patreon.com/Pete Dominic. I hope you have an awesome weekend, and I hope that you will be listening on Monday when I have Alex Aronson on the show for the first time. Very important guest who is picking up, I think, the work where Eric Siegel and many others have left off, and you're going to love him. So don't miss Monday's show. I won't have a weekend show as I have for the past 3 or 4 weeks with Christian and Ophira because I'm with the boys for the boys weekend. So I'm sorry about that, but we'll get back on it next week. Thanks again for all of your support. And here's 3 fun quotes to end today's show. Steve Jobs: the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. Estee Lauder: I never dreamed about success. I worked for it. And Billie Jean King: champions keep playing until they get it right. Really? Okay, if you say so. Thanks, guys. Talk to you next week.
The devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. This is the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't in sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run.